Evening everybody, it is Wednesday 21st of September and we've completed our run of blended Scotch whisky. Done, finished now. Was interesting though, quite enjoyed that. There was a couple of very nice surprises. So we're going to do a little run of blended malts. So if you've not come across this before, blended Scotch whisky, so blended whisky is a combination of malt whiskies from multiple single malt distilleries and grain whisky, whereas a blended malt is a blending of malt whiskies from malt whisky distilleries, but no grain is added. So it is just, it can be two or more malt whiskies from various distilleries blended together. Now they used to be known as vatted malts. So you'd have blended whiskey, single malt, and vatted malts, which was a vatting of malt whiskies. And it was kind of, at the time I was working for the whisky shop, this is what the terminology was. And it wasn't that long after I left, so it's only been going for about 10 years or so, where the Scotch Whisky Association decided, no, vatted malt is too confusing, we're going to call it blended malt, which arguably made it even more confusing because you'd have single malt, blended whiskey, and it sort of blurs the lines. So people who have been working in the industry for a while still tend to call it vatted malts because that's what you sort of grew up with and that's how you knew it, and it sort of differentiates it a little bit better than blended malt, blended whiskey, blah blah blah. Anyway, so the first one, and I'm just going to run through the ones that I've got alphabetically. If you want to know what I'm going to be doing for the next, well, I'm very nearly at 2/3. My next whisky after this one is going to be the 2/3 point. So if you want to know what I'm doing for the other third, the final third, it's look on the schedule, the Tumblr blog list of whiskies, to see what's coming up in my blended malt. Then it's Irish, then it's Japanese, then it's a big chunk of Speyside. I think there's about 60 of the buggers. Then it's world whiskies, and then finishing off on Islay. So the end is in sight. I am slowly working my way through the big long, in fact here's a picture of it that I've taken probably about a month ago, of all the whiskies that I've got lined up on my shelf, and it's all in order, and I'm literally just going that one, and just slowly working my way through it. So this particular one is a Drinks by the Dram, which I have a feeling was actually purchased by, on my behalf, very generously, by Chris and Lindsay Cook. That's Chris there. I've not actually had one of their donations for a while, so it's nice to put a picture of him back up. There we go. And this particular one is called Angel's Nectar. So this is from a company called Highfern, which is relatively new. It was a company set up in 2014 by a guy called Robert Ransom, who looks like this. And he was a former sales and marketing director of the Glenfarclas distillery. And basically went off on his own, and there is a little part of me that sort of thinks sales and marketing director, and looks at the bottle. Now the bottle looks like this. It's a very nice label. I do like the logo of it, but the press releases are talking about how they're trying to recreate the Angel Share, which is sort of nonsense anyway. The Angel Share, if you're not aware, is when you're maturing whiskey in casks, wood breathes, and over time, as the whiskey and the spirit is interacting with the wood, it actually seeps through the wood and then evaporates into the atmosphere, and that's known as the Angel Share. On average in Scotland, it's about 2% every year. And it's a sort of mythical term. The reason it's called the Angel Share is sort of romanticizes this evaporation. You know, it's science, but you call it the Angel Share because the angels are taking their share of the whiskey. So this is using that, and Robert Ransom is actually quoted as saying that he used to do tours, and every time he talked about the Angel Share, he used to see like his guest eyes sort of light up and take interest in it, and he wanted to kind of take that and almost use it as a brand. And this is where it starts to kind of move into brand and marketing rather than anything with any particular sort of concrete background. So yeah, they're attempting to recreate the Angel Share, which is kind of nonsense because essentially the Angel Share is the whiskey that's in the cask anyway. Regardless, so this is a blended malt. It's a young, unaged, but apparently it's young according to a couple of places that I've read, and it's a combination of Speyside and Highland malts. Now I'm willing to bet that there's probably some Glenfarclas in it. It wouldn't surprise me at all, because obviously, having worked for Glenfarclas, I've no doubt that he may well have contacted them and said, look, any chance I can have some of your stuff? But apart from that, what else is in there? I have absolutely no idea. Couldn't find any guidelines as to exactly what was in it. Now, very, very pale colour. I'm hoping you're able to pick that up, but that is really pale. I don't know if it is chill filtered and coloured, but I would be surprised if they did add colouring in. They certainly didn't add a lot. So I'm going to hazard a guess that this doesn't have any colouring, because this is really pale. We're talking kind of like light white wine colour. You know, this is, you know, Riesling-y type colour, even paler than that. It's 40%. You are looking at Master Malt selling this for 31 quid. So they also do a rich peat edition as well, which I think is quite new, maybe last year, maybe even this year in fact, which I have found, which is slightly more. I think it was about 40 quid for the peaty version. What the makeup of that is, I've absolutely no idea. And interestingly, it's quite white winey on the nose as well. There's a dry grape skin character to it on this. I am just going to double check it's 40%, because normally I write it down. Oh, hang on. It says it on the label, you numpty. Yeah, 40%. It smells a little bit... It noses a touch more. I'd probably almost say it was like 43%, something like that. But that might just be like the lightness and, of the character to it. But there's a dry grapiness to it. It does remind me, I don't know whether the colour is kind of almost turning my head a little and is making me think it looks like a white wine. It's making me nose it like a white wine, but there is a definite dry white wine character to it. It's pleasant though, it's unusual. There's a bit of freshness to it as well. There's a slight sort of very fresh garden mint, but almost like it's fresh garden mint that's been frozen. Because it's slightly concentrated as well. A little bit of sweetness coming through to it now as well. Interesting, unusual. It feels quite tight. It's dry again. It's dry on the palate, and it really dries your mouth out. It kind of soaks up all the saliva in your mouth and leaves your mouth quite dry. The mouth feels not too bad. It's not hugely rich, but it's not particularly thin. But there is this dry, again, kind of white grape skin character, which is accentuating the dryness. There's some sweetness to it. It feels quite tight. It feels too young. Now, it's a no age statement, but it is quoted as being young, so possibly 5-year-old upwards, that sort of thing. And the flavours are really tight and not really releasing. It feels like there should be some good character in there. There should be some richness. There is a fudgy character, but again, it's kind of tight. It's not that it's unbalanced. It just feels like it needs to open up. It feels like it needs to age more. It feels like it's a really young whiskey or young whiskies that actually need a few extra years just to really open out. And once they do, it would be an absolute cracker. It's interesting. The youthfulness of it gives it bite, but it's not like it's a blended Scotch where it's got grain whiskey in, which gives you that bite, but can be slightly overpowering and slightly too metallic or slightly too oaky. This has a vigour to it, and it's fresh, and it's got a bit of a zip to it, but it feels like it needs to open up a little bit more. Not by much, to be perfectly honest. It feels like it needs, like, all the whiskies within it need an extra year or 2 years in cask just to really open up and let those flavours loose. It feels like it's holding a lot back. but what flavours are there are actually quite pleasant. It just feels like it's too young. It's actually a shame. It's not a disappointing whiskey. It just feels like it's got a lot more to give. It feels like it should be giving me a lot more, and it's not. It feels like it's hiding a lot of character and flavour. To me, it feels like they need to do an Angel's Nectar ancient angels, or so Angel's Envy. Something where they do like a version up that's maybe like 45 quid, where it's just slightly older whiskies in there. Because I think the whiskies that they've got are good, they're just too young, they're not ready. It feels like it needs some more time. It just needs to sit for a little bit longer. It's not a letdown, it's not disappointing, it's not a bad whiskey. It just feels like it could be a lot better, a lot better. It's definitely worth trying to find it. I would certainly give it a go, you know, particularly in something like that. I'm going to say, I know there's not a lot, Chris, I'm sorry, but you know, I'm going to try and I'm going to save you that bit to let you try it if you've not tried it already. But try and pick up some and see what you think. It might float your boat more than it has done mine, because to me it just feels like it just needs a little bit longer. It really does need a little bit longer in cask, and it would be an absolute cracker. And they've just released it slightly too young. They've jumped the gun ever so slightly, and just needed to wait a little bit longer and then go, right, here we go, and it's an absolute cracker. Interesting though, one I've not come across. I do like the labelling. I think the logo is really nice, and it would be interesting to see. Obviously, they've now got the peat version. Be interesting to see what that's like. My fear would be that it's a bit like this, where it's a peated whiskey that's just slightly too young. But it'd be interesting to see if they do some slightly more premium, slightly older versions, because they could potentially be absolutely fantastic. Okay, right, quick rinse out, and then we'll crack on with our next one, which is the 2/3 point of the challenge. So I'll see you then. Cheers.